because this is no longer 2015, it's 2003. Because what is happening in terms of efforts to persuade Parliament to agree British bombing in Syria is a mirror of what happened with Tony Blair in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq. We have lies about intelligence, lies about 70,000 free army Syrians being on the ground to take over ISIS territory as they're pushed back, in theory, by the bombing. All lies. And this has come from the Joint Intelligence Committee, Cameron tells us. Well, for that, let's go back to the sexed up dossier in 2003, the pack of lies that justified the invasion of Iraq, from which so much slaughter, chaos and mayhem has followed. Instead of Tony Blair, we have Tony Blair Mark II, Prime Minister David Cameron, grotesquely exploiting the horrors of Paris to justify more horrors in Syria. We have Labour MPs in the opposition party, and apparently members of the shadow Labour cabinet, who are now saying that they will vote with Cameron to have the British bombing in Syria. We're having members of the shadow cabinet apparently saying they're going to resign over the stance of the leader, Jeremy Corbyn, that he's against it. Well, what I say to those shadow cabinet people is, sod off then. Let's get someone in who's got half a brain cell to see what's going on. And what I'm going to do today is connect the dots, which I've been connecting all these years, and here it is unfolding now on the TV screen. I've got to connect the dots that puts what's happening now in its true context. And of course, after Paris, which gave them the impetus to push for this further bombing in Syria and to take freedoms away at home, we had the incident this week with the Turkish fighters taking down the Russian plane, claiming that it was in effect invading Turkish airspace. Well, it came down in Syria, not Turkey, and even the Turkish authorities are only claiming that it crossed into Turkish airspace for 17 seconds. Russians say it didn't go in at all. And here we have a member of NATO, very significant as we'll see, Turkey, with this criminal dictator, President Erdogan, who has played a fundamental part in the creation and sustenance of ISIS, taking out a Russian plane, clearly premeditated, immediately following Paris, and at a time when Russia has gone into Syria and actually started to try to take ISIS out, which of course the Americans and the others have not tried to do because ISIS is their creation to take out President Assad of Syria. So we now have this incident with blazing headlines. Here we go. Monstrous new crisis over Russia's downed jet.
War looms as IS seeks to get nuclear bombs. Whoa, frighten them some more, then they'll give us their freedom. And it's terrifying how easily Turkey and Russia could take the world to the brink. Well, Russia didn't. It didn't shoot its own plane down, did it? You may have seen some videos circulating on the internet, certainly they're on my website, in which I was talking some time ago, well before all this started, and further back in my books and talks, much further back in the talks, about the plan for a third world war involving NATO and the West pitched against Russia and China, and the fact that the plan was to trigger this out of the Middle East. The question is, how did I know that? And the answer to that question puts current events into their true perspective. First of all, forget countries, forget individual countries, forget individual leaders. What you have, and I've exposed this in such detail in my books over decades, what you have is a hidden hand that works through governments, don't matter what party is in government. They're always there. They're the constant. They work through secret societies and semi-secret groups and through agencies and organizations that we actually see in the public arena but don't know the real background to. And they have had a long-term plan for this world and the human race. And it is to create a global fascist, communist, call it what you like, same bloody thing in the playing out, a global fascist, communist, Orwellian state of total control involving a world government, world central bank, world army, microchipped population and then some, world single currency, cashless, no physical money. Been talking about that for 25 years. Look what's happening. And part of this plan of transforming the world into this global police state and centralized tyranny is a series of wars. There's nothing that changes a society more than a war, and if you want to change global society, you need global wars. Look how fewer hands power was in after the First World War than it was before. And again, pushing it on, how that continued after the Second World War. And there's always been a plan for a third world war to complete the process of creating a centralized global dictatorship, in the end justified by we must stop this ever happening again. What you're not being told is that those who will say that are the ones that have created all the mayhem to justify the transformation of global. So what I'll do now is just put together a few pieces to put current events into context. In the year 2000, in September 2000, there was an organization in America called the Project for the New American Century. It was peopled by those who came in
shortly afterwards to the Bush administration when it took power in early 2001. They included people like Cheney, became vice president, president in truth, and Rumsfeld became defense secretary, Wolfowitz, who became deputy defense secretary but was actually the real defense secretary, and a stream of others who came into significant positions of power in the Pentagon and elsewhere with the Bush administration in 2001. And they included a long list of prominent Zionists with fundamental connections to Israel. The reason that is significant is that in September 2000, this organization produced a document calling for the American administration and military to embark upon regime change after regime change in country after country, fighting what they called multi-theater wars. These countries included Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, etc., and also called for regime change in China. Oh, that'll be interesting. The people behind that document then came to power in early 2001 with the Bush administration. Now, that document in September 2000 said that this process of transformation, this regime change, would be slow, quote, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. One year to the month later, after they were now in power, America had what Bush called our Pearl Harbor, 9/11. As a result of that, inside job, the official story is a fairy story. The process of picking off countries on the list began. With, of course, Iraq we've had, and Libya and Syria now, and it goes on. So, let's go to Iraq. Shortly after 9/11, matter of days, General Wesley Clark, former Supreme Commander of NATO, told a television program in 2007, he said that a few days after 9/11, he went to the Pentagon and he met Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz and all these characters, and then he met a general that he knew. And he was told that they were going to invade Iraq. And of course, Clark is taken aback. What do you mean you're going to invade Iraq? Why? The guy didn't seem to know. Because of compartmentalization, he probably didn't know. And a little while after that, not long, after America was now in Afghanistan, Clark went back to the Pentagon and met that same general. And Clark says to him, and go on the internet, put a few keywords in, and you can watch the interview. Clark said to him, why aren't we invading Iraq? You said we're going to invade Iraq. And the general said, it's worse than that, sir. And he pulled out a document from a drawer, and he said, we've just had this down from upstairs, in other words, Rumfeld's office, and that they were going to invade 7 countries in 5 years. Among them, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran. And so they started to pick the list off. And of course, there was Iraq. The idea was to invade Iraq, but there was no reason to do that. This brings us to Tony Blair and George Bush and the infamous, blatantly mendacious, sexed up dossier talking about the threat of weapons of mass destruction from Iraq and Saddam Hussein that has now been exposed as a complete pack of lies. While Bush and Blair were saying right up to the Iraq invasion in 2003, it could still be stopped if Saddam Hussein will get rid of the weapons of mass destruction, which he didn't have. It's now known that Blair agreed with Bush on that invasion a year earlier. And I've shown in my books, years ago now, in fact in 2003, that it goes back even further. What was happening and why they needed the lie of weapons of mass destruction was they had this list of countries for regime change and acquisition, and they needed excuses. They go into Afghanistan, oh, get bin Laden, he was behind 9/11. What, from a cave in Afghanistan? Then Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, and in they go. And at around the same time, a weapons inspector called David Kelly, Dr. David Kelly, told a BBC reporter that that dossier justifying the invasion had been sexed up. In other words, it was full of bloody lies. And this was very dangerous to this lie to justify the invasion of Iraq, to pick it off the list. So he committed suicide. He committed suicide as much as I committed suicide yesterday. He was murdered, taken out. And the reason he was taken out, and the reason the official story of his suicide is so ludicrous and shot full of holes, is because he was taken out because he had the knowledge as a weapons inspector who had been to Iraq many times to know that it was all a scam. So, Iraq picked off. Untold numbers of people dead, slaughtered, maimed. A country torn asunder. And if you think, just contemplate the number of dead people that have resulted from the lies of Bush and Blair and the people behind them, where the real power is, it is unspeakable. And all this chaos that has followed on purpose, come to that, is the result of that same pack of lies from Blair and Bush. And far from making their millions since they left politics, they should both be under lock and key for the rest of their lives, with a key thrown mid-Atlantic. Let's look at the list. Libya. We'll have that one now. You keep giving the same excuse. war invasion after war invasion, then people are going to go, hold on a second, what's going on? So you keep changing it, or changing it a bit. So what you do then, you want to get rid of Gaddafi in Libya. So what you do is you train, arm and fund freedom fighters, better known as terrorists, to start attacking the Gaddafi regime. And when he responds, you say that Gaddafi is killing his own people, and to protect them from violence, you have to go in and bomb the shit out of it, including all those civilian areas. Go on the internet, go onto an image find search engine and put in Libyan devastation, destruction, whatever, from NATO bombing, or worse to that effect, and see how the people of Libya were protected from violence. These people are not just psychopaths, they're super psychopaths, and they're running our world, and we need to take it back from them. So, Iraq was left in devastated, catastrophic chaos, violence, upheaval. Libya was left in chaos, violence, and catastrophic upheaval. And they moved on to Syria. And they did the same job. They funded, armed and trained freedom fighters of the so-called Free Libyan Army. Moderates, they're moderate. Yeah, they kill people moderately in very large numbers. And they started attacking the Assad regime in Syria. Same script this time. And Assad responded, he's killing his own people. And so these terrorists were funded, armed, well documented now, funded, armed and trained by the West, particularly America, on behalf of the Hidden Hand. And all this mayhem and violence has unfolded. Al-Qaeda, which was the organization blamed for 9/11 and connected to Osama bin Laden and Afghanistan, that justified them going in there, actually was the creation of the United States. Al-Qaeda stands for the base or the database, and it comes from the database of Mujahideen fighters funded and armed by the Americans to fight against the Russians in Afghanistan. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, Jimmy Carter's former national security advisor, who is part of this hidden hand cabal, has actually admitted that he funded and armed and all the rest of it, the Mujahideen, which became Al-Qaeda. So we fight Al-Qaeda, but we don't, these psychopaths do, or soldiers on their behalf. They never fight anybody, sipping bloody coffee in Washington and Downing Street, saying, we're going to fight the terrorists. No, you're not, you ain't going anywhere. We're going to send other poor buggers to do it. So here we have a situation where this Al-Qaeda, the creation of the United States, and they use it then to fight in the Middle East, because Al-Qaeda's dangerous terrorists, and then these Al-Qaeda characters are involved in the fight against Gaddafi. So now they're not so bad. And then they move into Syria under names like al-Nusra and stuff, and the whole thing morphs into ISIS, another creation, outgrowth of the Western creation of terrorism to justify the invasion of countries and to justify, through terrorist attacks, the destruction of freedom at home. But what's happened is they were held up by Assad. Assad didn't go as quickly as they thought he would. They thought he'd go about the same time as Gaddafi. And it's gone on and on and on, and they've not been able to remove Assad and take over the country. And they had another problem in that Russia was supporting Assad. And it reached the point recently where clearly Putin could see where this was going. The United States and others, Turkey, what have you, France, was supposed to be bombing ISIS in Syria all this time to destroy the terrorists. But they haven't been. They've just been getting stronger. And of course, what anyone with a brain cell could see, and certainly Putin could, is they weren't trying to remove ISIS because they wanted ISIS. They created ISIS to remove Assad. They want to destroy him. So Russia go in to Syria, invited by Assad, the only people bombing who have been, and they start bombing ISIS and meaning it. And suddenly ISIS start to get on the run. Ooh, that's bloody bad news. That's the last thing we want. And here it is, the Russians now supporting Assad. We've done all this to get rid of him. Oh, what's going on? He's spawning a party here. And so we had the attacks in Paris, immediately followed by the taking down of the Russian plane by Turkey on the most outrageous, with the most outrageous excuse, clearly premeditated. And look at where we are now, because there's different levels of this. And deep, deep in the rabbit hole, where the hidden hand is well beyond the knowledge of at least most of these players, they have the very circumstances that I've been talking about all these years for the start of World War III. They have now, on one side, the United States, the rogue state of Turkey. They have France. And, of course, Cameron is desperately now, and seems to be getting support from these idiotic Labour MPs who won't listen to the common sense of their leader. They want Britain bombing in there as well. So there you have NATO. And what is the plan? To pitch NATO against Russia and China. So you have Russia now in Syria with warplanes, and they're bringing more high-tech, state-of-the-art equipment in as a result of the downing of this plane. They're also supported, as Assad is, by China. And the plan was and is for a third world war involving NATO against Russia and China. And also in there is another target on the list, Iran, supporting Assad. So you have this powder keg situation that has miraculously unfolded, as I've been talking about it would in the light of their plans for years and years. From the start. And of course, the demonization of Russia started with Ukraine. Ukraine was subjected to the latest United States organized coup to remove an elected leader, not a nice man. No, how many of them are? But an elected leader. And in was put this guy, Poroshenko. WikiLeaks have revealed communications showing that he was an insider for the United States in Ukraine for years and years before. So they put their man in, and they start the demonization of Russia, and that's been followed by what's happened since. Do you know who orchestrated the coup and the handing over of power to America's man in Ukraine? A lady called Victoria Nuland, Assistant Secretary for European and Eurasian Affairs at the US State Department. Do you know who her husband is? Robert Kagan, co-founder of the Project for the New American Century. It's a movie. And you Labour MPs better get your fricking arses in gear. Start using some brain cell activity. Start doing some bloody research and realise that you are being had again, not by a new war, but by the continuation of the same war on human freedom and human liberty. And you know, we've had Blair, Labour Party, does what he did. Now we have his opponent, whoa, David Cameron, Conservative Party, doing exactly the same, continuing the same script. In America, we had George Bush, Republican, did what he did. And now we have President Obama, Democrat, opponent, whoa, doing the same. You know why nothing changes except that? Because they're all masks on the same face. And when that penny drops, human race, we might have a chance